He had everything: money, power, absolute control over his life and business. But for Daniel, feelings were just distractions, weaknesses that he would never allow to take over his sharp mind. He built empires, destroyed competitors, and never looked back, until a single woman crossed his path. Hannah wasn't a millionaire, didn't run big companies, and had nothing to offer apart from her authenticity. But it was precisely this that made Daniel lose something he had never lost before: control. What happens when a cold, calculating man is forced to face the one challenge he was never prepared for? When he realizes that true power lies not in numbers, but in what he has spent his entire life avoiding. This is no ordinary love story. It's a battle between reason and emotion, between a man who believes he dominates the world and a woman who unwittingly dismantles every one of his defenses. And when he finally realizes he's losing, Daniel will have to make the hardest decision of his life: keep running away or surrender to the feeling that could destroy him or save him forever. The panoramic windows of the office reflected the city outside, but Daniel didn't care about the view. He was focused on the contract in front of him, a document that would guarantee yet another successful acquisition. On the other side of the desk, a short man in a rumpled suit was sweating under the pressure. "Please, sir, my company is all I have. 20 years ago, I built it from scratch." Daniel crossed his fingers on the table and leaned forward slightly. His expression was impassive. "Sentimentality doesn't keep a business alive," he said, his voice firm without hesitation. "The market demands efficiency. You had your chance, but you didn't know how to manage your resources. Now you're just putting off the inevitable." The man swallowed, looking at the lawyers next to Daniel, who were waiting for his signature. Is there any other option?" Daniel let out a short, impatient sigh. "You can sign now or wait for the bankruptcy. The result will be the same, but this agreement still gives you some dignity." Silence hung heavy in the room. Finally, with trembling hands, the businessman picked up the pen and signed. Daniel just nodded to one of his assistants, who collected the papers without a word. "Good decision," he said before getting up and leaving the room without looking back. In the corridor, his assistant Laura was waiting for him. "Congratulations, sir. That merger was a masterstroke." He just nodded without emotion. "Is the coffee on the table yet?" he asked without stopping walking. "Yes, sir. As always." He entered his living room, a spotless environment with no personal traces. On the table, a cup of coffee, just the way he liked it. Black, no sugar, no distractions. He sat down, picked up the cup and put it to his mouth, but frowned when he tasted it. "What's that?" he asked, looking at Laura. "A mistake by the cafeteria. They sent the wrong order." He put the cup down. "Unacceptable." Laura hesitated for a moment before continuing. "I can order another one, sir, but the coffee shop is 2 blocks away." Daniel stared at the coffee on the table. He had time for a walk. "I'll sort it out myself." As he left the building, he ignored the surprised looks from the staff. He rarely did anything out of his routine. He walked to the indicated cafe and pushed open the glass door. The aroma of fresh coffee and freshly baked bread filled the room. A woman behind the counter, wearing an apron and an easy smile, looked at him. "You look like you could use a strong coffee," she said, already preparing the drink. "But maybe a little sugar wouldn't hurt." He raised an eyebrow. "I don't drink coffee with sugar." "Maybe you should," she replied, handing him the cup. Daniel watched her for a moment. Her carefree tone, the way she spoke without fear. Something in him was bothered by it, but as he took the first sip, he felt a different warmth in his chest. He didn't know what it was. All he knew was that for the first time in a long time, he was intrigued. Daniel couldn't understand why his feet had taken him back to that coffee shop. He could easily have sent his assistant to get the coffee or chosen somewhere else. But there he was again, standing in line, watching the woman who had served him the day before. "You're back," said Hannah, smiling when she saw him. He tilted his head slightly. "I need a coffee." "Oh, right. Because there isn't another coffee shop in the whole city, is there?" she joked, picking up a cup. He watched her in silence, There was something about her that disconcerted him. Her naturalness, her lack of hesitation when she spoke to him as if they were old acquaintances. He wasn't used to that. "I like your coffee," he said, trying to justify his presence there. Hannah raised an eyebrow as she prepared the drink. "Really? Because it sounds more like you enjoy the conversation." Daniel frowned, but before he could answer, she pushed the cup towards him. "Here you go. Strong, no sugar. But one day, I swear I'll convince you otherwise." He took the coffee and left without answering. As he walked back to the office, he realized that for the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without fear. Over the next few days, he came back more often. He always gave the excuse of coffee, but deep down he knew it wasn't just that. Hannah always greeted him with a smile and a joke. Little by little, the interactions became natural. "You know, I still don't know your name," she said one day. "Daniel. Nice to meet you, Daniel." "I'm Hannah." He nodded, but didn't say anything. He was used to direct, no-frills conversations. But with Hannah, every interaction felt like a small battle. The fifth time he appeared, she crossed her arms and looked at him with an amused expression. "Right? You're already a frequent customer. I think you deserve a loyalty card." "I don't need one," he replied, picking up his coffee. "Ah, but I insist. Every 10 visits you get a free coffee." He snorted but accepted the card. To his surprise, on the back Hannah had written, "Maybe a free coffee will convince you to smile one day." Daniel looked at the message for a moment before putting it in his pocket. That same day, something inside him made him make an impulsive decision. "Have dinner with me tonight?" he asked casually. Hannah blinked a few times, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "No." Daniel froze. "What do you mean, no?" "Exactly," she said, laughing. "I don't accept invitations from mysterious clients who appear out of the blue and tell me nothing about themselves." He arched an eyebrow. "Are you turning down an invitation to have dinner with me?" "Yes." For a moment, Daniel didn't know how to react. He was used to hearing yes to everything, but instead of getting angry, he felt even more intrigued. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered. "What doesn't make sense?" "You." She laughed, picking up a cloth to wipe the counter. "Ah, Daniel, you're going to have to try harder than that." He left the cafe with a strange feeling. For the first time, someone wasn't interested in him for who he was, or rather, for what he possessed, and that made him obsessed. Daniel had never been the type to take no without question, but something about Hannah made that refusal seem more than just a challenge. It was a mystery. He continued to go to the coffee shop every day. The excuse was coffee, but deep down he knew it wasn't just that. "Look who's come again," said Hannah, without even asking for his order. She had the coffee ready before he even opened his mouth. "I like coffee," he said casually. She crossed her arms, smiling. "Because, honestly, it seems more like you enjoy the conversation." Daniel held the cup, watching her for a moment. "Are you always like this?" "Like what?" "Like this, too honest." "And are you always like this?" she retorted. "Like what?" "Trapped inside this impenetrable man's armor." He frowned but didn't reply. Over the next few days, their conversations became longer. Hannah talked about how she opened the cafe, about her customers, and how each one had an interesting story. "So you really like it?" he asked one day, looking around. "Of course. For me, every cafe has a story. Every person who comes in here brings something new." Daniel looked at her, not understanding. "Sounds tiring," Hannah smiled. "Maybe for you, but what about you? What do you do apart from work?" He didn't answer right away. "Work keeps me focused." "Focused on what?" This time the silence was longer. "What matters?" he finally answered. Hannah sighed. "Money without life means nothing." He narrowed his eyes. "Do you think my life has no meaning?" "I don't think you've ever stopped to think about it." Daniel felt an uncomfortable twinge with that sentence. He didn't like feeling analyzed, least of all by someone he had just met. But instead of walking away, he came back the next day, and the next, and the next. On the fifth time, She looked at him with an amused smile. "Right, Daniel, now you're a loyal customer, I'll give you a loyalty card." He arched an eyebrow. "I don't need that." "Oh, but you do." She handed over the card, and as he turned it over, he saw the handwritten message. "Maybe a free coffee will convince you to smile one day." He stared at those words for longer than he'd like to admit. That same afternoon, something inside him made an impulsive decision. "Have dinner with me tonight?" Hannah blinked a few times, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. "No." Daniel froze. "What do you mean, no?" "Exactly," she said, laughing. "I don't accept invitations from mysterious clients who appear out of the blue and tell me nothing about themselves." He arched an eyebrow. "Are you turning down an invitation to have dinner with me?" "Yes." For a moment, Daniel didn't know how to react. He was used to hearing yes to everything, but instead of getting angry, he felt even more intrigued. "That doesn't make sense," he muttered. "What doesn't make sense?" "You." She laughed, picking up a cloth to wipe the counter. "Ah, Daniel, you're going to have to try harder than that." The next day, he waited until the cafeteria closed. When Hannah came out, she found him leaning against his car. "Dinner tonight?" She crossed her arms, pretending to consider. "Only if it's not a romantic dinner." "No romance." Hannah smiled and picked up her bag. "All right then." As he got into the car, Daniel noticed something strange. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control, and strangely, that didn't seem so bad. The restaurant was simple, without excessive luxury, exactly as Hannah would have chosen. She analyzed the menu calmly, while Daniel next to her observed the surroundings with trained eyes. He was used to dinners in sophisticated places, with waiters who hardly made a sound when they moved. Here, the buzz of conversation and the sound of dishes mixed chaotically. "Did you expect something different?" Hannah asked, noticing the look on his face. "I'm not used to places like this." She smiled. "Places with real life, you mean?" He didn't answer. He just looked at the menu. "Do you want an expensive wine, or can we just order a juice?" Hannah joked. "I don't care about that." I doubt it." He closed the menu and stared at her. "You like to challenge me, don't you? And you like to control everything. I bet you even have a schedule routine and a strategic plan for every date you've ever been on." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You seem to know a lot about me, and you seem to know very little about yourself." The answer caught him off guard. He had never met anyone who spoke to him like that. The waiter arrived and Hannah ordered first. Just as Daniel was about to speak, she interrupted him. "And he'll want the same." The waiter nodded and left. "Did you just order for me?" "Yes. If it's awful, at least we'll suffer together." He let out a short laugh. "You like to test boundaries." No, you like to impose rules." He didn't reply. Dinner was served, and to his surprise, he enjoyed it. But what really hooked him wasn't the food, but Hannah. She talked passionately about simple things, about how she loved to watch the sunrise in the cafe, about how she liked to hear stories from her customers. "Have you always been like this?" he asked after a while. "Like what?" "So different," she smiled. "I've always been myself. What changes is the way people see me." Daniel frowned thoughtfully. For the first time in a long time, he felt like talking about himself. "When I was a child, my father used to say that feelings were weakness." Hannah remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "He taught me that the world has no room for the weak." She rested her chin on her hand. "And you believe that?" He hesitated. "I believed it for a long time. And now?" Daniel looked away. "I don't know. At least you've started to question. That's progress." He remained silent, feeling strangely uncomfortable. Since when did he, Daniel the Iceman, allow this kind of talk? Dinner over, they walked side by side to his car. "Well, I must admit, you survived the first dinner without any dramatic escapes," Hannah joked. "I'm not one to run away." She stopped and looked straight at him. Still. Before he could ask what that meant, Hannah stood on tiptoe and brushed her lips against his in a quick, unexpected kiss. Daniel felt something inside him shudder, but before he could react, she pulled back. "Good night, Daniel." And with that she turned and got into the cab that was already waiting for her without giving him time to reply. He stood there, tasting the kiss and, for the first time in years, completely uncontrolled about what would happen next. Daniel didn't return to the cafe the next day, nor the next. He wanted to believe that it was just a matter of scheduling, that business was demanding his attention, but deep down he knew he was running away. Hannah's kiss had been unexpected, quick, but devastating. He didn't know what to do with it, with what he had felt at that moment. Felt. That word didn't belong in his world. On the third day he didn't show up. His assistant Laura walked into his office. "I need to schedule your meeting with the investors for tomorrow." "Oh, and that coffee shop you used to go to called." Daniel looked up. "Did she?" "The girl, Hannah, said that your coffee today is paid for and waiting." He frowned. "She said that?" Laura nodded, looking at him curiously. "Do you want me to answer something?" Daniel hesitated. The mere mention of her made his chest tighten in a way he didn't like. "No." Laura left and he remained seated, staring at nothing. Why was this bothering him so much? He tried to get back to work, but the numbers and contracts no longer seemed so important. Something was missing, and he knew exactly what it was. That evening, sitting in his spotless, quiet apartment, he realized that he was restless. He picked up his cell phone, typed in Hannah's number, but didn't call. He didn't do that. He had never felt the need to look for someone like that. But now the silence around him seemed deafening. The next day, during an important meeting, he found himself distracted. "Sir?" one of the investors called out. "Repeat the last part," said Daniel, trying to pull himself together. At the end of the meeting, he sat down at his desk and took a deep breath. This was ridiculous. It was just one woman, just a coffee shop. He would go back to his routine. But at the end of the day, when he realized that he was driving aimlessly, he understood that he wasn't as in control of himself as he thought. The next thing he knew, he was standing in front of the coffee shop. As he entered, he felt Hannah's gaze on him. "Good morning, stranger," she said with a slight smile. "Good morning." She finished serving another customer and approached the counter. 3 days. "Was that you trying to run away?" "I don't run away." "Oh, right, because the great Daniel is unshakable." He wiped his face. "I needed to think." "And did you come to any conclusions?" Daniel hesitated. He wanted to say that it didn't mean anything, that it was just a passing moment, but he couldn't lie to her. "I don't know what I'm doing," he confessed. Hannah smiled, as if she had expected that answer. "Welcome to the real world." She picked up a cup and poured his coffee, pushing it forward. "You know what I think, Daniel? You know what? You spent so long pretending you don't feel anything that now you don't know how to deal with what you're feeling." He remained silent. "But I'll tell you what. You can keep running away, or you can admit that maybe, for the first time in your life, something real is happening to you." Daniel looked down at his cup. He smelled the coffee, the warmth it emanated. Something inside him told him that this was the most important decision he would ever have to make. Hannah waited patiently, as if she already knew the answer before he said anything. And then, for the first time, Daniel took a deep breath and let the words come out with sincerity. "I don't want to run away," she smiled. "Then stop running." And in that instant, he knew that his life would never be the same again. Daniel had never felt so vulnerable. Not in front of investors, competitors, or big business, but standing there in the cafeteria, staring at Hannah. He had said out loud that he didn't want to run away, and now he couldn't go back. She just smiled, as if she expected him to come to that conclusion on his own. "Then stop running," she repeated. Daniel wiped his hands across his face, took a deep breath, and looked at her. "And what do I do now?" "Well, starting with your coffee would be a good first step." He let out a short laugh and picked up his cup. He took a sip and, for the first time, felt more than just the bitter taste of coffee. He felt that he was really there, in that moment, without having to prove anything to anyone. Over the next few days, Daniel went to the coffee shop not out of habit, but out of desire. He and Hannah would talk for hours about small and irrelevant things, and he still felt that each conversation meant more than years of meetings and contracts. But there was something he still hadn't done. One evening, after another long day at work, he stopped in front of the now closed cafeteria. He took a deep breath and knocked on the glass door. Hannah opened it with a surprised look. "The cafe is closed, Mr. Millionaire. I didn't come for the coffee." She crossed her arms, a smile playing on her lips. "Then what did you come for?" Daniel didn't answer. He just approached and gently held her face. "I spent too long thinking that love was weakness, but the truth is that fear made me weaker than anything." Hannah's eyes softened. "Are you afraid of getting hurt, Daniel?" He took a deep breath. "I'm afraid of losing you." A silence took over the space between them. Hannah studied his face, then smiled. "Then stop thinking so much." And it was she who pulled him into a kiss, this time without hesitation. The kiss was different from the first one, stolen the night of the dinner. This time there were no doubts, no fears, just surrender. When they broke apart, she laughed. "At last. Finally what? Finally you understood." Daniel ran a hand through his hair and laughed along. "Yes, I think I understand." That night he didn't go back to his cold, luxurious apartment. He stayed there with Hannah, discovering a world he had never allowed himself to know before. And for the first time in his life, Daniel realized that love didn't weaken him. On the contrary, it made him feel stronger than ever.